represents the 1936 drought here in the Midwest. So it's kind of interesting. Drought is not a new thing. It's something that comes to us a lot. So let's go to what I really want to talk about is making decisions, and not just during drought, because ranchers, people that have in agriculture, make a lot of tough decisions, and there are challenging times. And you know what may be a challenging time to you may not be a challenging time to someone else. It really depends on the resources, depends on where you're at in your business and what you're doing. But that's what I want to talk about today, and I think this is an awesome topic because we talk a lot about production techniques and about what to do and all these things, but there's when it really comes down to it, the person that makes the decision is the operator or the owner of the ranch, and that's really it's not always easy to make decisions. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can make good decisions and some of the things that you might consider to help you make better decisions, because we can always make better decisions. And even if you make great decisions, sometimes it doesn't always work out. But we're going to talk about that. Here's some factors that I think affect the decision-making process. Knowledge, things you can do or know. We're going to talk about each one of these individually. So the more knowledge you have about something, the better off you are. That's one reason why I think we find forecasts so fascinating. If we knew it was going to rain, then we could plan accordingly. If we knew it was not going to rain, then we could plan accordingly. Also, tradition. Things are sometimes handed down from father to son or from generation to generation, things that we've done. Tradition can be a good thing. Tradition can be a bad thing. But basically, tradition is the perspective by which you see things. And so there's something that you need to think about when you make decisions is, how does this conform to the tradition, or, why is tradition existing? There's some things we can think about that. The next thing you talk about is emotion. Emotion is an interesting thing because emotion is not knowledge and it's not tradition. It's something that we do. It's how we feel. In other words, these are things you feel, or I can't do that. I don't feel that's right, or I'm not. Emotion is a big part of how we make decisions, and it's something you need to consider, and you need to recognize that you have emotion about something, because sometimes emotion can help us make really good decisions and help us stick to those decisions, but sometimes emotion can cause us to make bad decisions and decisions that are just based on how we feel that may or may not be based on anything that we know. And then limiting options. And this is kind of related to emotion a little bit, but we can just basically just say, hey, I'm not going to do that. There are some things I'm just not going to do when making a decision. I'm not going to sell my cows, or I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to do that. And we have to be honest about that. These are things that we refuse to think about and do. And when you're making a decision, if you're not going to think about an option, you might as well just take it off the table because you're not going to think about it. Now, I don't know that that's a good idea or a bad idea, but it's something that happens when we make decisions. Now, self-honesty, this is another thing that's very difficult for us to do. All of us. This isn't just decisions about ranching, but decisions in general in life. In other words, look yourself in the mirror and say, am I really just kidding myself, or am I being honest with myself? In other words, is this really true, or do I want it to be true? In other words, maybe, sometimes, we know it's not going to rain, but, well, it might rain tomorrow, and we just keep telling ourselves that. That's really not self-honesty. So these are important things to consider when we're making a decision. Okay. The first thing we need to talk about is the issue in deciding what is the challenge of the decision to be made. And like I said, this could be used for drought, but this could be used for any decision. Like if you're going to bring let's say you have some more people that are coming into the ranch to become part of it, your children or grandchildren or something, whatever. Or you're going to make a decision to increase the cow herd or decrease the cow herd or buy land or whatever the decision is, or sell cattle or change the way you're doing things, or even things that you've always done. These are still decisions that you need to make. So challenges might include questions about cost or strategy or timing. And, for example, the thing you need to know, like, what is my production cost? These are things that you probably need to know. How do I manage through a drought? I mean, what is your plan? I mean, if you haven't got a plan or haven't done something, you're probably going to be in pretty dire straits, because the cost during a drought is tremendous. I mean, you have a tremendous amount. Feed costs generally go up. Pasture is not available. You have to rent it for higher prices. There's all kinds of things that happen. So you got to have a plan, or you have to have, is this the decision you're going to make? How am I going to finish managing through this drought? Or how am I going to recover from this drought? In other words, if you're already thinking recovery and thinking, okay, how am I going to get my cattle back? What am I going to do? There's some very serious and important decisions there, because it has to do with the ranch. And what is the fear of the, fair lease price for cows? There are all kinds of decisions. Here's some more examples. What is my break even for retaining weaned calves? Which feed is my best buy? And how much does winter grazing corn or stock grazing cost? These are all things that, and this last question seems a little bit redundant, or a little bit simple, but the truth of the matter is, if you're paying a certain amount for the corn stalks, is that the only cost? Or are you driving out there every other day? Are you providing water and hauling water? I mean, are you building fences? Are you then transporting the cows to and from the grazing area? I mean, there's a lot more to cost than perhaps that people might think of. So these are things that you need to consider when you're thinking about cost and those kinds of things. So let's move on here. Deeper probing. Once you've decided what you want to know, you need to ask further questions about the challenge. In the case of a drought, you might ask, how severe is it? In other words, how long is this going to last? Well, we just heard from Mark, and Mark has told us that it's not going to probably go away. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to be as bad as it was last year, but it's probably not going to go away. So that means we need to be thinking about that. Now, is this the best information? Well, probably for right now it is. And how long will it last? Your guess is as good as mine. But, you need to think about, what if it lasts this year, and what if it even goes next year? Then what do I do? How do I find answers? And these are the questions that you need to start at. You need to be thinking about these all the time. This year, next year, and the years after, because this isn't going to be the only drought that comes along if you stay in business. Okay, a quick comment. Not all questions are answerable. In other words, I'm saying you may have questions that you can't answer, but they do affect the choices you have to make. In other words, you may not have answers to these questions, but you still have to make a choice. You still have to choose, do I cull, do I reduce the number of cows, do I increase the number of cows? What do I do here at this point? Do I buy feed? Do I keep feed for another year? What am I doing? How am I doing this? And so you must make decisions based on probabilities. In other words, you have to, in your mind, come up with some idea. Well, you know what? I think there's an 80% chance that there's still going to be a drought. So I'm going to go with that, and 20% chance there's not. So, what's your plan? How is it based on those probabilities? So basically, while you may not always have perfect information, you do have to make a decision. In fact, by not making decisions, you could come with some problems. Okay, these questions would cause lots of thought and work of the individual managers. So in other words, a lot of times managers are willing to go out and mend fence or fix windmills or drive their truck out there and look at the cattle or pull calves or do all kinds of things. But the one thing they don't probably spend enough time doing is they need to think about the individual problems or questions that are plaguing their business they need to improve on. In many cases, I've found in many situations, by taking a little more time to think about things, people come up with really good answers, and people also find out that their hourly rate during the time that they're really thinking about those decisions is in the thousands of dollars. So sometimes, the cost, even though it's difficult, sitting down and thinking about things is a very important thing to do. And it's also very much worthwhile because it can make you money or save you money. No one can tell you what are the correct choices. In other words, you've got to make the choice. A lot of people, a banker will say this, and somebody will say that, and your friend will say this, the neighbor's doing that, but these aren't necessarily the right choices for you. You have to make your own choice. And many of these choices may make the difference between success and failure. And you obviously know that because you've been in business long enough, or people, around you, you've seen people go in business, you've seen people go out of business, and it has to do with the choices that they make. And it's a very, difficult thing, but we all have to have the chance to be successful. We all have the chance to be a failure. And hopefully that we won't see a lot of failures, we'll just see successes. But now, what I really want to talk about is there are some systematic things you can do that may help you through the process. And that's really where I can be helpful. Is that, I can't tell you what the right answer is. I can't tell you people call me all the time and say, well, what should I do? Or how should I do this? Or what, how much does this cost? And I go, well, it depends on your particular situation. And you have to know what your situation is, and then you have to be able to quantify it. And that's the process I'm talking about. And there's tools that can help you. Not just tools that I've made, but tools at other universities. Or you can make your own tools if you know how to make spreadsheets. These are things that you need to do. And that's what you need to do is in the process, and that's what we're going to talk about. Now that we've got the water all muddy, in other words, telling you there is no way to make a decision because you don't know the real answer, what I'm going to say is you have to make decisions. And to help clarify what I'm talking about, decisions need to be based on facts as much as possible. or the best available information. And that's all you can do. You can make decisions on nothing more than that. Choices should be made that align with your business and personal goals. In other words, if you're choosing something that doesn't really align with what you want to accomplish or doesn't head you down that path, you need to really question, okay, what am I doing here? Is this really, in other words, if you want to keep a certain genetic base in your herd and you're selling your herd, that doesn't make any sense. And on the other hand, if you really can figure out a way to do that differently and you don't really need that, then and you're not selling your herd, then there's another, that doesn't go with your personal goals, with your business goals. So what are your personal business goals and how they align, and how you make choices that best align with that? The decision maker needs to understand the amount of risk his choices will create and the amount of risk he or she in the business can withstand. This is very, very important. If you don't know how risky a decision is, you better be very careful, because that decision may have a lot of risk in it that you don't understand. And if it's there and you make that decision and choice, you may be putting your farm or your ranch at risk. Also, the same is true with the amount of, in other words, what if your business has just started out and you faced with some of these tough decisions, you are in a very precarious situation, because you're now faced with a situation where you have maybe an opportunity to be, your business has to be challenged, or it not doesn't have to be, but it is challenged, and it may cause you to have problems with being able to withstand that risk. So you need to understand what that is, and you need to make those decisions. And you may not make the most ideal decision, but you might make a decision that would keep you in business so that you can live to fight another day. Sometimes retreating is the best way to go. Okay, even though you have goals and objectives, you might have to retreat a little bit on those goals and objectives so you can stay in business. Objectivity will help you make in other words, look, here's the deal. If you can't sit back and really be objective, in other words, I've seen people, like, for example, there was a guy, he was a salesman for a certain feed product. I used to mix rations, and he had a feed product, and he believed in his feed product so much that he was not objective about it. That feed product didn't work the way he said it did. And as a result of that, he was not objective. He couldn't make he was having people try to make choices that weren't based on reality. But you have to sit back and look at your situation and say, look, is this really true, or is this just because I want to believe it? And you have to really do that. And that's a difficult thing to do. But you know what? You need to make decisions based on choices based on their merit, not on what you think, which may be what you want to believe. You have to do it on objectivity. And that's a very difficult thing to do. But if you can do that, you'll make really good decisions. Because, in other words, if you look at your situation and you realize, you know what, if I don't do something, I'm going to incur a great debt that I'm going to have a hard time paying off after this drought's over. And so you may have to do something. You may have to call deeper than you perhaps wanted to. You may have to not buy as much feed. You may have to sell some cows. There's just things you might have to do. Things that you don't want to do, but objectively, when you really look at it, you recognize that they'll be the best for the business and best for you. And that's a hard thing to do, but it's very important in making good decisions. Ability to move past emotion. In other words, that's what we're kind of talking about too. In other words, if you're attached to a certain group of cows, which you might be, and I understand that. I've milked cows and I've worked with cows a lot of my life, and it's difficult. You've got your blood, your sweat, your tears. You've worked hard. You've done a lot of things, and those are your cows, and that now you have to make a decision that it's very difficult. So that emotion thing is a very hard thing to come over, but that's where objectivity comes in, and that's where emotion, you've got to think about it, and you've got to move forward based on what you need to do, not based on what you want to do necessarily. And sometimes that's difficult to do. But you need to think about that. And no one can tell you it's emotion or it's based on true fact. You have to sit down and you have to figure this out yourself. And you know what? That's the way it should be, because it's your business and you're the one that's built it. Choices need to be made thoughtfully in a time when there's no... Here's another thing. If you can make a decision based on a time period that is not during the situation or crisis, you're going to be a lot better off. Because during a crisis, you may make a decision that will cost you more than you want to pay. You make a rash decision because you're in panic, or you're in a crisis, and you got to do something. You got to do something now. If you wait for that panic or crisis to come, what will happen is that decision will be made for you because of the crisis, not because you made the decision, and so you lose control. To remain in business, this is quite simple, and if you can remember this, it's really important. Cost must be less than revenue. Now, In the short term, this may not be the case. You may be able to lose a little bit of money because you have value stored up in your business. In other words, you own the land and you can borrow money on it, or you own the cows and you can borrow some money on it. But that only happens for a certain time. And once you go into debt, then you have to pay that debt back and you no longer have those reserves. So you got to be very careful how you use that. So, it's very important that you think about this and think about what you're going to do. Because another thing, let me give you an example. After this drought is over and land becomes plentiful, things are going to change and cow prices are going to change. Everything's going to change. And so you have to think about those kinds of things when you're thinking ahead here. The question of cash flow. In other words, let's say you have 500 cows and you sell them all. Well, if you put it in a tax deferral and you don't do anything with that, what are you going to live on in the meantime? So you have to think about these kinds of things, and when you make a decision, you have to consider all the possible outcomes and what you're going to do and how you're going to solve the problem before you have it. It's very important because if you don't do that, you may find yourself in a situation that you didn't anticipate. Okay, one-way alternative, accuracy and equity must be considered. And I'm going to tell you what I mean by equity and what I mean by accuracy. Obviously, accuracy is important because you want as much and right information as you can get to. Equity means that you need to weigh the choices on equal grounds. In other words, if you're biased towards one choice versus another, that's not equitably. You need to compare them equitably, and it's very, very important that you do that. And so that's why some of the tools that we have here at the university can help you out. We actually have a tool that you can actually evaluate your cow herd. We also have a tool that you can evaluate your cow cost, and there's some feed cost calculators, and there's some other things that we have here that we can share with you. And also there's educators all over the state of Nebraska that can help you, and I'm sure that those in South Dakota would help you as well, or anywhere other state for that matter. Both of these factors can be improved by using common methodology. In other words, when you calculate the cost or the decision and you're weighing two things, do them the same, using the same tool, using the same information, and do it the same way. If you change the information, I think you have to change the information on both of them. You got to be very careful that it's equitable and that you're thinking about it the same way. Other factors that influence economic decision choices. You got personal goals. You have business goals. What are they? Are you in it for the long run? Or are you just in it for another few years? That really depends, and what that will affect the decision you make. You also have to whatever you think is going to happen, or whatever you think the current environment is, your beliefs are going to affect your decision process. So make sure that your beliefs are as accurate as possible. Now, the other thing that you need to do is you need to understand your options. And sometimes this is difficult to do because we don't always think about options. And so sometimes it's important to get somebody else's opinion. This may be your partner, if you have a partner or somebody that you rely on, maybe your banker, it may be professionals. You can get their opinion and talk about options. Doesn't mean you have to do them, but I think by understanding what those options are, given a certain challenge in your business or what that is, that will give you a lot more insight. Also, you have to think about the availability of other resources. What else could I do? What else could I use? Is there some other way I could solve this problem that currently I haven't thought of? There's a lot of things that you do in then making decisions. Okay, to make good choices, knowledge about the outcome of those choices needs to be created. You need to understand, in other words, if you're going to sell your cows, what is my place going to look like 5 years from now? If I sell these cows today and then try to buy them back, I assume certain things happen in the market. What's it going to look like? There are spreadsheets, like I said. We have one that can help you make that decision. It's not that difficult to use. But you can look at that, and you can look at a lot of different choices. What is it going to look like if I don't sell? In other words, compare the two. Or what is it going to look like if I sell 20%, 15%, 25%? What is it going to look like if I whatever those choices are for your particular operation? You need to create the outcome and then be able to compare the outcome and say, given the information I have, knowing what I understand, this is what I think is going to happen. And then you can put some probabilities and some things around them. I can show you how to do that, or anybody else can show you how to do that with this particular spreadsheet. And you can look at a lot of different variations in the probability of success or the chance of success. And you can look at those things, and you can then make a clear decision. Choices should be considered long before choices make themselves. In other words, if you see a train coming down the track, don't stand there waiting for a train wreck. Do something about it. Get ready. Get off the track. Do something. Whatever it takes. Pad yourself. Whatever you're going to do, get yourself ready for that particular collision. Get yourself so you can avoid that. In most cases, early preparation costs a lot less than last-minute solutions, and that's a very, very important fact that you need to consider. So these are the things that I would consider in making decisions. It's not easy. Decisions you have to make sometimes are not easy decisions. They have to do with things that you hold very dear, things that you are very important to you. Also, it has to do with your income. And those are very, very tough decisions to make, but they're decisions that have to be made every day. You know, when to sell calves, how to sell calves, where to sell calves, whether to expand the herd, not to expand the herd, whether to rent that pasture next door, whether not to rent the pasture, and then, of course, during the drought, all the things that you have to make about herd sizes or culling or renting pastures or paying more for feed or all those other things, you need to think about them carefully, because if you make the choice to do such, you may find yourself in a situation that may not be pleasant. Okay, you got to know your costs and be honest with yourself. In other words, if you're going to go out and buy feed for the drought and say, I'm just going to feed them in the yard, be honest about it. Where am I going to financially sit after that's over? What is that going to do to my business? What does it do to the probability of me staying in business? Maybe there's something else I can do, a combination of things. Maybe I can feed some of them, maybe not. Maybe, you know, whatever it is. And I'm sure that you've all thought of all those things. But, you know, you need to consider them and be honest about that. Be open to many different ideas. In other words, think of new ideas, things as solutions that perhaps you haven't thought of before. Sometimes, you know, well, I'm not taking my calves to corn stalks in the wintertime. Well, that's fine if you're not going to do it. But perhaps maybe there is a way that you could save yourself a lot of money. I'm not saying it is or isn't, but I'm just saying be open if that's something you can do. If you can't be open, you can't be open. I guess you're going to have to limit yourself. That's okay. At least recognize that. And be careful of extreme solutions. In other words, don't just go out and do an extreme solution because it seems like it's different than other solutions. Check it out. Be very, very careful of making sure that the decisions you make are based on as much facts as you can get and are weighted against other possible solutions. Don't just do something crazy to do something crazy because it just seems like you're desperate. And that's one of the most dangerous things you can do, and that's when people a lot of times will get into trouble. All right. Now, get information, help from others, stakeholders and professionals, bankers, extension professionals. These people are all there to help you. And in some cases, you pay them to help you. And in some cases, you don't. They're paid by the government or whoever. You know, you don't have to do what they say, but at least you can listen to some of their ideas. Perhaps you can use some of it, perhaps you can't. Whatever. It's your decision. You have to make it, but get as much information as you can. Where possible, use appropriate tools to assist you. And I'm talking about there are a lot of spreadsheets out there made by a lot of universities, and I have a bunch on my website, which is agmanagerstools.com, which will be on here later, that has a lot of tools. There's a tool for figuring out which feed is appropriate. There's tools to figure out the cost of that feed and how much it's going to cost you to feed over that period. There's tools that will help you understand whether you should be selling or buying cattle. There's tools that can help you to understand what your approximate cost is based on putting the information in that you have about, hey, this is what it costs me to produce a calf, and this is what I think calves are worth. Guess what? Am I going to make money or lose money? I don't, you know, you'll be able to know that really, really rapidly, actually. And so there's a lot of different factors. There's a lot of different tools. There's a lot of different things you can use. Use the right tool for the right job. I found this picture and I thought it was pretty interesting. He's got a little tiny rake on the end of his tool there. You know, it's a very powerful tool, but it's not being used for the appropriate thing. I think he could probably rake by hand, or you use a weed blower. It'd probably work better. All right, discussion and questions. That's where we're at.
Okay, well, thank you, Matt. If anybody has any questions, again, type them into the chat box here, and we'll get those answered by Matt. And Matt, I've got a couple questions for you.
Sure.
To start things off, you mentioned these tools. Now, are those available on your website, or where should people go to see these tools?
Okay, I just put the slide up. If you type in www, and I didn't put the www up, but agmanagerstools.com, you'll go to the West Central website, and there will be a picture of me and my colleague, and there will be a list of livestock or agriculture or crop tools, and then you click on one of those, and then there's a whole list of tools in the middle of the page that you can look at, and there's various tools for various things that I talked about. But I'm not the only one that has tools. I think Kansas State has a bunch, and I think every extension service has some. If you can't find them, I would suggest you talk to an extension professional. They could probably find tools for you the appropriate ones. Or if you really know how to use a spreadsheet well yourself, you can build them yourself.